Dear listeners, a new day and a new story to discuss. Today I'm going to tell you a story that interests me. Listen and write down what you think about this situation. I'm interested in your opinions. You wouldn't guess it to look at me, just a regular guy on the outside. But inside, it's a different story. I'm Chris. I've got this facade that everyone buys: the devoted husband, the reliable neighbor, the easygoing coworker. Nobody sees the festering anger, the one I hide so well. Tonight, I'm going to tell you something I haven't dared to speak aloud. It's about my wife, Sarah, and my so-called best friend, Mike. It was just another Thursday evening, or so it seemed. I got off work early, something I seldom do, excited to surprise Sarah. I imagined her smile, how she'd jump into my arms. I was a fool. I pulled into the driveway, quiet. I crept up to the door, keys in hand, ready to make my entrance. But the silence struck me as odd. It was too still. Then, a laugh. Not hers, his. A laugh I knew well, but never expected to hear in my home without me there. I pushed the door open, the betrayal unfolding before my eyes on our living room couch. Sarah and Mike, so lost in each other they didn't notice me. The shock? It hit hard, but the anger hit harder. I stood there, frozen, the fool with his heart cut out. Having fun, are we? My voice sounded alien, even to me. They sprang apart, guilt written all over their faces. Chris, it's not what it looks like, Sarah stammered, her voice shaky, pleading. Pathetic. Save it, Sarah. And you, I thought we were friends, Mike. My words were cold, measured. Mike stood up, adjusting his shirt, no apology in his eyes. Chris, I can explain. What? How you stabbed me in the back. I cut him off. No explanations could mend what was broken. They didn't understand the pain, the depth of the betrayal. As I stood there, watching them fumble for words, a plan began to form in my mind. Not just any plan, but one that would settle the score. They took my happiness. I'd take theirs. As I left the house that night, the image of their guilty faces burned into my memory. I knew what I had to do. Revenge wasn't just a desire. It was a necessity. They might have thought this was a momentary lapse, a mistake that could be forgiven. They were wrong. You see, I'm not just the laid-back guy everyone thinks I am. Underneath, there's a lot more going on, a calculating mind planning each move. Tonight, the game begins. And I'm the one making the rules. You know, when you think you've hit rock bottom, there's a bitter comfort in believing that things can't get any worse. That comfort is a lie. A cruel, mocking whisper. Last night, after catching Sarah and Mike together, I thought that was my lowest point. I was wrong. This morning, the air in our house was thick with unsaid words, a toxic cloud choking me slowly. I watched Sarah, her every move. She was careful, too careful, trying to piece together the fragments of normalcy from the shattered reality we now inhabited. Chris, please, we need to talk about this, she begged, her eyes red from a sleepless night. I looked at her, really looked. The woman I married was gone, replaced by a stranger with familiar eyes. What's there to talk about, Sarah? You made your choice. It was a mistake, Chris. I love you, she pleaded. Mistakes are forgetting to pay a bill, not sleeping with my best friend. I snapped, the bitterness in my voice sharper than I intended. She flinched, as if my words were physical blows. But weren't her actions a blow to our marriage? I'm sorry, I really am, she whispered, her voice trembling with desperation. Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it. The house felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in with the weight of her betrayal. I needed to escape, to breathe. As I stepped outside, the cool morning air hit my face, raw and biting. It matched the turmoil inside me, a storm brewing with no sign of passing. I walked, my steps aimless yet driven by an undercurrent of rage and hurt. Each thought of Sarah and Mike together was a stab, relentless and deep. How could they? How could she? The park was empty, a solitary space echoing my isolation. A couple jogged past, their laughter a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I sat on a bench, my mind racing with plans, with the need for retribution. They thought this would blow over, that I'd forgive and forget. They were gravely mistaken. My phone buzzed, a text from Mike. "Can we meet? I owe you an explanation." An explanation. As if his words could mend what was broken. "Sure," I typed back, a smirk forming as I sent the message. Let him come, let him squirm and try to justify his actions. The meeting place, our usual bar, felt ironic, almost mocking. I arrived early, the bartender nodding at me with a concerned frown. "Rough night, Chris?" he asked, pouring me a drink without waiting for an order. "You could say that," I replied, my eyes fixed on the door. When Mike walked in, his usual confidence was gone, replaced by hesitation. He sat across from me, searching for words. "Chris, save it, Mike. You owe me nothing." My voice was cold, detached. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I am sorry." "Sorry doesn't change anything," I said, my fingers tightening around the glass. "I know," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the table. I let the silence stretch, letting him stew in his guilt. "You know, I always wondered what would break first in our friendship. I never thought it would be trust," I said finally, the words slicing through the quiet. Mike winced, and I savored that small, cruel victory. "I need to clear my head. Consider this the last drink I have with you," I declared, standing up. My plan was taking shape, each piece falling into place with cold precision. As I left the bar, the air felt different, charged. Sarah and Mike's betrayal had broken something fundamental in me, but it had also awakened a resolve I didn't know I possessed. They would regret their choices, and I would make sure of it. Revenge, after all, is a dish best served cold, and I was just getting started. I've always believed that understanding your enemy is crucial to any battle. Now, my home feels like a war zone, and my enemies were once the closest to me. Isn't that a bitter twist? Reflecting on everything, I can't help but replay each moment leading up to the revelation. Was I blind? Perhaps too trusting? Sarah, with her gentle smiles that didn't quite meet her eyes lately, and Mike, whose camaraderie I took for brotherhood. What a fool I was. But let's be clear, I'm no victim. I'm just a man pushed to the brink, recalculating his next move. Last night, as I lay in our bed alone, the sheets cold and unforgiving, a plan began to crystallize. It was simple, elegant, and devastating. Just like the betrayal. "Chris, can we talk?" Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts this morning. Her figure, framed in the doorway, seemed smaller somehow. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched. "What's left to say?" "I'm truly sorry, Chris. It was a horrible mistake." I. Her voice cracked, but I felt nothing. The well of my empathy had dried up the moment I saw them together. "Mistakes are for children, Sarah. Adults make choices." "And you chose him," I said calmly, each word measured and precise. "But I choose you now, Chris. Please." Her hands reached out, trembling. I looked at her, really looked.
No, Sarah.
"You chose me the day we got married. What you're choosing now is damage control." She flinched as if struck, tears brimming. "What are you going to do?" "What I must," I replied, standing up. My actions needed to match the gravity of their betrayal. There was no room for half measures. As she sobbed quietly, I walked out, the sound of fading echo as I closed the door behind me. The air outside tasted like freedom, or was it revenge? Sometimes they smell the same. I drove to work, but not before a detour to a familiar house, Mike's. He wasn't expecting me, evident by the surprise on his face as he opened the door. "Chris, what are you?" His words hung in the air as I pushed past him into the living room. "We need to settle things," I stated, turning to face him. "Chris, I know I messed up, but let's not do anything we'll regret," he pleaded, his usual confidence now a crumbled facade. "Regret? Oh, we're well past that, Mike. You see, I'm here to offer you a choice. Something you didn't offer me." My voice was calm, almost soothing, but the threat was palpable. "What choice?" He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around. "Leave town. Get a transfer, move away, and never contact us again. That's your way out." Otherwise, I let the threat hang, unspoken but clear. Mike paced, his hands running through his hair. "And if I don't? Then I make your life here untenable. Think, career, social circles, peace of mind. Gone." I shrugged, as if discussing the weather.
Fine.
"I'll leave. Give me a week," he said, defeated. "1 week. Not a day more," I confirmed, then turned and left without another word. Driving away, I couldn't deny the rush that came from taking control back. It was empowering, intoxicating. I was reshaping my destiny, one calculated step at a time. First Mike, now Sarah. The board was set, the pieces in motion. Tonight, I'll confront Sarah. It will be the final act in this sordid play. She needs to understand the consequences of her actions. Not through violence. No, that's for brutes. But through a cold, calculated withdrawal of my presence, my support, my love. Betrayal, after all, is a game two can play. And I intend to win. It's just you and me here, isn't it? Let me lay bare my soul, then. You see, the hardest part wasn't catching them, or the lies, or even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I had become secondary in my own life without even knowing it. A supporting actor on a stage I built. That realization stung more than the betrayal. And I decided neither Sarah nor Mike would get away with making me feel that way. Tonight was the night, the final confrontation with Sarah. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would say it, playing out each scenario in my mind like a chess master plotting his winning moves. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. Sarah was in the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand, her posture tense. She knew this was coming. She had to. "Chris," she began, her voice a mix of fear and resignation. "I've been thinking, save it." I cut her off, my tone flat. "I've heard enough, thought enough, and decided." Her eyes searched mine, looking for a sign of the man she married. "Chris, please. We can fix this." I almost laughed. "Fix this? Sarah, what we had is beyond repair. You chose to step outside our marriage, remember?" "I know, and I regret it every second," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Regret is a cheap commodity these days," I replied. "I want actions, not words. What do you want me to do?" She was desperate, grasping for anything. "I want honesty. Just for once, Sarah, be honest with me. Why him? Why did you do it?" I needed to hear her say it, needed her to acknowledge the depth of her betrayal. She hesitated, taking a deep breath. I felt ignored. "You were always working, and Mike was there. It was a stupid mistake, Chris. I never stopped loving you." "Being available isn't the same as being desirable," I said, my voice cold and measured. "You were lonely, I get it. But loneliness is no excuse for betrayal." She sobbed, her body shaking. "What are you going to do?" I took a step closer, my resolve steel. "I'm leaving, Sarah. Tonight. This house, this marriage, it's over. I won't be made a fool of, not anymore." "You can't mean that," she gasped, reaching out to me. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. I've never been more serious in my life. But where will you go? Her concern was genuine, but it was too late for that. That's for me to know. I need space, and you need to think about your actions and their consequences. My words were like daggers, and I knew each one hit its mark. Chris, please. Her voice trailed off into a whisper. I'll send for my things. Don't contact me. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Turning on my heel, I walked out the door, each step cementing my decision. As I drove away, the weight of the past years seemed to lift, if only slightly. The night was dark, the road ahead uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was reclaiming my life on my terms. This was my game now, and I was playing for keeps. No more betrayals, no more lies. Just me, my rules, and the road ahead. You know, when you set things in motion, there's always that sliver of doubt, that whisper asking if you've gone too far. But then, there's the louder voice, the one fueled by betrayal, that drowns out all hesitation. That's the voice I listen to. I'm not just out for redemption anymore. I'm crafting my revenge, and it's shaping up to be my masterpiece. After leaving Sarah, I holed up in a motel on the edge of town, a place where no one would think to look for me. My phone was off, no calls in or out. It was just me, my thoughts, and the plans unfolding in my head. I had to be careful, methodical. If this was to be my final act, it needed to be flawless. A couple of days passed before I turned my phone back on. Voicemails piled up, mostly from Sarah, her voice a mixture of confusion, fear, and desperation. Texts from Mike too, a pathetic attempt at reaching out. But there was one message that caught my attention. It wasn't from Sarah or Mike. It was from Jenna, Sarah's sister. Chris, we need to talk. It's urgent. Please call me back. Jenna. She had always been kind to me, never a part of Sarah's schemes. Curiosity piqued, I called her back. Chris, thank God. Where are you? Everyone's worried, she sounded relieved, yet tense. I'm safe, Jenna. What's so urgent? I kept my tone neutral, guarded. It's Sarah. She's missing, Chris. No one has seen her since the night you left. We thought she was with you. Missing? The plot twisted before me, turning into something I hadn't anticipated. No, Jenna, she isn't with me. I haven't seen her since that night. There was a pause, heavy and laden with unspoken fears. Chris, please, if you know anything, I don't, Jenna. But I'll come back. I'll help look for her. Ending the call, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Missing. Could she have done something foolish, something desperate? The game was changing, shifting into a dark territory I hadn't foreseen. I drove back to town under the cloak of night, my mind racing. This wasn't part of the plan. I needed to tread carefully now, each step calculated with precision. The stakes were higher, the risks greater. Pulling up to our house, the scene was chaotic. Police cars out front, a few neighbors scattered around, their faces etched with concern. I slipped through, unnoticed at first, making my way to the front door. Chris. It was Detective Morris, a guy I knew from high school who made detective last year. We were just about to call you again. When was the last time you saw Sarah? 3 nights ago. We had a fight, and I left. I confessed, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Mind if we talk inside? His tone was professional, but his eyes searched mine for something more. Inside, the living room felt cold, unwelcoming. Morris's questions were sharp, probing. Did she say anything to you that night? Anything that might suggest where she'd go?
No.
It was just a fight. I didn't think she'd run off. Every word was measured, my mind racing to keep ahead of the conversation. We're doing everything we can to find her, Chris. If you think of anything else, anything at all, it could help. Morris insisted, handing me his card. Of course, I nodded, pocketing the card. As he left, the weight of the situation settled on my shoulders. Sarah missing changed everything. This was no longer just a game of revenge. It was a mystery with real consequences. Turning over the card in my hand, I realized that every move from now on had to be perfect. The game was deeper, more dangerous. And I had to win, not just for my sake, but potentially for Sarah's too. It's just us again, isn't it? Here in the quiet, I can almost hear the ticking of the clock, each second marking the weight of decisions I've made and the ones yet to come. You know, it's in moments like these, when the world's asleep, that the truth doesn't just whisper, it screams. Sarah is still missing, and with each passing day, the pit in my stomach grows. I've begun to question, was my desire for revenge worth it? This game I started, it was supposed to make things right, to somehow balance the scales. But here I am, grappling with the morality of my actions. Have I lost myself in this vendetta? I walked the streets tonight, the same ones Sarah and I used to wander through during better days. The cool air felt harsh against my face, a stark reminder of the reality I now live in. As I walked, I thought about everything that led us here, to this precipice of moral ambiguity. Was my revenge justified, or was it just a reflection of my own brokenness? Chris, any news? Jenna's voice broke through my thoughts on one of these nightly walks. Her presence has become a constant, her concern a reminder of the stakes at play. Nothing yet, I replied, keeping my voice steady. The police are still looking. So am I. She nodded, her eyes searching mine. Chris, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Sarah did something drastic because of the fight? Her question hung between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I stopped walking, feeling the weight of her gaze. I don't know, Jenna. I truly hope not. Her hand touched my arm, a gesture of comfort. We all make mistakes, Chris. Sometimes, our actions have unintended consequences. Her words stung, echoing my own fears. Yes, we all make mistakes, but at what point do they define us? At what point do we become the very things we despise? As Jenna and I parted ways, I found myself at the park bench where Sarah and I had carved our initials years ago, a naive promise of forever etched in the wood. Sitting there, I couldn't help but reflect on the complexity of human emotions: love, betrayal, revenge. They intertwine, blurring the lines between right and wrong. The phone rang, shattering the silence of the night. It was Detective Morris. Chris, we need you to come down to the station. There's been a development. My heart sank. I'm on my way. Driving to the station, my thoughts raced. What had they found? Was Sarah okay? The streets blurred past, each streetlight casting long shadows, mirroring the darkness that felt like it was closing in. At the station, Morris met me with a somber look. We found her, Chris. She's alive, but she's in the hospital. She was in a motel on the outskirts of town, took too many pills. It looks like a suicide attempt. The room spun. Guilt, relief, fear. They all crashed into me like waves. Sarah, attempting to end her life. Was this the consequence of my actions? Sitting by her hospital bed later, watching her breathe, the steady beep of the monitor a constant reminder of her fragility, I pondered the cost of my revenge. It was meant to punish her, yes, to make her feel some of the pain she caused me. But this was never part of the plan. Chris. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. I'm here, Sarah. Tears filled her eyes. I'm so sorry, Chris. For everything. And there, in the dim light of the hospital room, I realized that no victory in revenge equals the weight of a clear conscience. What had started as a quest for justice had morphed into a cycle of pain and regret. Looking at Sarah, so broken, so lost, I knew it was time to step back, to reassess not just my actions, but who I had become. Maybe it's time to find a new path, one where forgiveness isn't just a possibility, but a necessity. Not just for Sarah, but for myself as well. Because in the end, isn't that what we all seek? Redemption, not through the suffering of others, but through understanding, through the tough, painstaking work of repair and rebuilding. The road won't be easy, I know that. But perhaps, just perhaps, it's the only one worth taking now.